From the United Nations headquarters in New York, this is Disarmament Today.
My name is Ewan Buchanan, a political affairs officer with the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Our guest today is Ms. Setsuko Thurlow, who has been appointed by the government of Japan as a special communicator for a world without nuclear weapons. Ms. Setsuko Thurlow was born and raised in Hiroshima and experienced the atomic bombing at the age of 13. She remembers vividly August the 6th, the day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and the hardships many survivors endured physically and mentally thereafter. Subsequent to the atomic bombings, Ms. Thurlow started attending a local Christian church in Hiroshima in the hope of finding meaning in her life. Professionally, she practiced social work in the United States and Canada. She is married with 2 sons and 2 granddaughters and currently lives in Canada. She has devoted over 40 years of her life to nuclear disarmament. Her work in this field has been recognised by the Government of Canada, which awarded her the Order of Canada in 2007. Ms. Thurlow also received a commendation from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan in April 2000 of this year for her contribution in promoting peace education around the world. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. Can you please tell us about your experience in Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945?
I was a 13-year-old grade 8 student at the girls' school in Hiroshima. And in those days, Japan was losing badly in the war. They mobilized all the students. And I was sent to the farm to help the farmers with the rice planting, harvest, digging potatoes. Another time I was sent to the tobacco company and to prepare cases of cigarettes to send them to the fighting soldiers at the front. And finally, I was chosen to be one of the about 30 girls who were sent to the Army headquarters to be trained to act as decoding assistant. Can you imagine the 13-year-old girl dealing with such top secret messages such as, 2 American battleships are sailing northwards towards Japan, things like that. Well, at least I was able to decode the secret message. Little did we know, Americans already found how to read the messages. Anyway, that's what I was supposed to do on August 6, 1945. And we just finished the morning assembly at 8:15. And then all of a sudden, I saw a brilliant bluish-white flash outside the window. And I had the sensation of floating up in the air. And that was the end of my consciousness. I don't know how much time passed, but when I regained consciousness in the total darkness and silence, I tried to move my body. I couldn't, so I knew I was faced with death. Then I started hearing whispers of the girls around me. Mother, help me. God, help me. Those voices still ring in my ears. Then all of a sudden, somebody behind me started shaking my back and my left shoulder. It was a male voice. Must have been the soldier. Don't give up. Keep pushing. Keep moving. I'm trying to free you. You're tied down under the collapsed building. Now keep moving. And you see the sun ray coming through that opening over there, and crawl towards it. Quick. Move quickly. And that's what I did. And 2 other girls managed to come out. And we looked back, but the rebels were already on fire. So, of course, we couldn't go in. Then I looked around outside. Although it happened in the morning, it was dark, like twilight. Perhaps because of the dust and dirt and soot and all these things which were being sucked into the rising mushroom cloud. Anyway, those things must have prevented the sun ray. So sometime in the morning, it was like evening. Then I began to see some moving objects. Then I realized those were human beings. Although they didn't look like human beings, they were like ghosts, because anybody who had the hair was standing upward to the sky, and hardly anybody was recognizable. Their faces, arms, and everything was burned and blackened and swollen, and skin and the flesh were hanging from their bones, and parts of their bodies were missing. And I did see some people with their own right eyeballs in their hands. And we have to carefully step over the people on the ground. And so many people had the stomach burst open with the intestines stretching out. We were told to join the ghostly procession, and we escaped to the hillside. At the foot of the hillside, there was a huge army training ground, about 2 football fields combined. And that place was just filled with the dead bodies and dying people, seriously injured people. And people who are still alive were asking in very faint voices, "Water, please. Water, please." Nobody had the strength to yell and scream, "Give me water." And I didn't see any doctors and the nurses. I learned later about 60% of the medical professionals were killed themselves anyway, but none of them were in where I was. So we 3 girls decided to go to the nearby stream and wash off the blood from our body. And we tore off the blouses and soaked them in the stream. And we just rushed back to the seriously injured people and put those wet cloths over their mouths. And they desperately sucked the moisture, something like that. And that was the only thing we could do. No doctors, no nurses, no medication, nothing. Just a little bit of water. And many just had a last breath there. We busied ourselves all day with this task. And when the darkness fell, we sat on the hillside and just feeling stunned from witnessing the massive scale of human suffering. And all night, we watched the entire city burn. That was my first day. On that day, except our group, which was at the Army headquarters, all the grade 7 and grade 8 students from all the high schools in the city were brought to the center of the city. And they were to provide their labor to clear up the fire lanes. So they were in the center of the city, and there was nothing to protect them from the explosion. Many of them simply just burned, melted away. And some survived and came back and told us what happened, what kind of last hours they had, horrible stories. But I understand that the explosion took place about 600 meters above the ground, and the temperature in the center of that explosion was over 1 million degrees Celsius. And these fireballs descended very quickly, and the temperature came down very quickly. By the time it reached the ground, the temperature in the center core of the fireball was about 4,000 degrees Celsius. So what chance did those people on the street had? Simply melted. My friends and my relatives, including my sister-in-law who was a teacher and directing the students there, well, we never saw them again. Next day, I was joined by my parents who came to search for me. And the soldiers said, is there Setsuko Nakamura? I said, here I am in the mountain. We were able to reunited. My father was out of town that day. He was enjoying fishing, his favorite activity. And then in his boat, he could see the mushroom cloud rising, so he knew something happened. And he took the train part ways, and from there he walked back. And of course, he had to struggle to get to where our house had stood. When he first got there, house was still standing, I understand, but our house was burned in mid-afternoon, I think. My mother was doing the dishes after breakfast. She too was buried under the collapsed building, but she was rescued. But the horrible thing is, my sister, who was living in the country to protect the life of her 4-year-old child, came back to the city and visited us. We were very worried about their being in the city. But anyway, she wanted to see the medical doctor next day. So she and the son were walking over the bridge. And that's where they were burned and blackened and swollen. And somehow, apparently, she crawled back to where the house had stood. And with the help of the neighbors, she was able to escape to a relative's summer house. That's where we spent next 10 days or so caring for them. What care could we give? By the time we got some water to give to them, their whole body was unrecognizable, and the bodies were so swollen, and we couldn't even open their face, mouths. The jaw was so tightly pressed against. Anyway, my sister survived for 4 days, and her son lasted for 10 days. It's a terrible, terrible memory. Well, I can go on and tell you about such suffering, but the unique thing is about the effects of radiation. My uncle and aunt, they looked all right. Everything was intact, arms and legs. But about a week later, they started developing purple spots all over their bodies, and that was a sure sign they were going to die. And their bodies were reacting to the exposure of the radiation. And sure enough, according to my mother, who cared for them until their death, their internal or all the intestines and everything seemed to be rotten, and melting and coming out as a thick black liquid. Well, because of the radiation, which we had no idea at that time, which just penetrated into the body. So externally, some people looked all right, but internally, their inside was so badly affected.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, obviously, what are very clear, vivid memories even after all these years. Yeah. Obviously, the events of Hiroshima changed your life completely. Can you tell us how it changed your life? In what ways?
Well, I had been exposed such a massive scale of death and human suffering. I think I became very sensitive to human suffering. And I also watched a lot of adult people who weren't defeated, who stood up, did something to help suffering people, like my church minister. He was a minister, but he wasn't just looking after the congregation. He went out, started establishing the home for 5,000 orphans. And he did a lot of so-called social work. And there were so many people who were just dedicated to live and to let the people live. And those images really empowered me. And I wanted to be like them. They were the role model. I want to be of help for the suffering people. I wanted to be part of the solution to the massive problem human being caused. Well, as a result, I chose social work as my profession. And, the determination, I wanted to be part of the solution to the world's problem. I became activist, well, not only by that experience, but I think that experience certainly intensified my desire to do that.
And so can you tell us, when did you decide to start speaking about your experiences, to become part of the Hibakusha testimonies?
Okay, two important points. When I first came to the United States in 1954, I had a news conference. People were curious to look at what kind of human being the survivor from Hiroshima was. And 1954 is a special year. That's when the United States exploded the largest hydrogen bomb at the Bikini Atoll in South Pacific. And that created all kinds of disaster in the South Pacific as well as in Japan, because all the fish caught by the fishermen had to be thrown out, and one fisherman dies and the rest of the crew member became sick. So Japanese said, well, not only Hiroshima and Nagasaki, now in Bikini, how long does United States intend to continue developing nuclear weapon? And that's when the powerful peace movement started. And that was the time when I had the offer of scholarship to study in the United States. I came. So when I was asked what I thought about what was happening in the Bikini and in Tokyo and throughout Japan, I said, well, I was naive, fresh graduate from college. I honestly told them what I thought, which is that developing the nuclear weapon should stop, because there is always a danger of using some of them. Then next day I started receiving unsigned hate letters. And that's the time. I just arrived to the United States, and this was reality, and that frightened me. I was alone here. And that was a real soul-searching. Am I going to shut my mouth and pretend nothing happened? Or am I going to tell the truth to the world? It was painful, but I came out with strength and commitment to speaking and warning the world about the danger of nuclear war, nuclear weapons. I think that was great, that survivors were not simply defeated. We stood up. We wanted to do something positive because no human being should experience such act of inhumanity, illegality, and immorality.
As you know, we at the United Nations have been sharing the same goal of nuclear disarmament with you.
Yeah.
And I know that you've actively participated in some of the meetings at the United Nations, including the first committee of the General Assembly, and also I believe you came to and attended the review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Can you tell me what you think about the UN's efforts in disarmament and how we can work together?
You know, in North America as well as in Japan, I hear people say, we can't stand the slowness or the lack of action by the United Nations. But I said, well, what else can take that important role? Even if it doesn't produce as much as we hope to. But that's the only hope we have. That's where people have to negotiate for the solution of the problem.
Yes, and civil society, including organizations like your own, have an important role to play in this.
Yes, I agree. And I think many NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are doing that.
But as you say, I mean, NGOs have an important voice and it must be heard. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. But I want that voice to be larger, stronger, and more effective. For example, one of the NGO person was a member of the official delegation from Canada about several years ago. But at the last NPT conference, that role was eliminated, I understood.
No, but I do think it's important that NGOs do attend and do speak. And I think the last NPT review conference back in 2010, I think there were about 10 speakers from NGOs, including some atomic bomb survivors. Yeah.
Yes,
and that was
I heard
very
about
impressive, yes. A very humbling experience to hear directly from somebody who had suffered like that. Yeah. And it was a very moving event. Yeah. And I think anybody who was there can't fail to have been moved by that. It was a very powerful event. Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear that.
As you know, we have a large number of young listeners, and I know that one of your activities has been going to schools here in New York City and elsewhere. Can you tell me what that is like for you?
I enjoy being with young people. They're so hungry for information, for knowledge, and that's wonderful. I encourage them to be critical thinker. First, learn about the world, about your life, about your community, and your government leadership, and what is being accomplished.
I'm over 50 years old myself, and I do remember earlier in my lifetime that the threat of nuclear war was much discussed. We were aware of things like the threat from nuclear weapons, nuclear winter, etc., but it's unfortunate that today's generation have not grown up with that, and that's why I think it's very important that people like you continue to tell your story.
Maybe they think now the Cold War is over. We're doing better. That's not so, in my opinion. I think situation is much worse now. When I experienced it, there were only 3 nuclear weapons. Now, the 9 states have more than 20,000 of them. Well, that's much worse situation. And it's so important that the world inform itself. I live in Canada. I am from Japan, and I spend a lot of time in the United States. I question if the government leadership is really anxious to keep the younger people, the their citizens be informed about this issue. If they are concerned, they should be doing more.
Nuclear weapons are here. They do exist. As you say, there are 20,000 of them still in existence, and many of them are on hair-trigger alert, ready to be launched any time.
Right, right.
And as long as nuclear weapons exist, there clearly represents a possibility of accidental firings, mistakes, etc. And so that's why, the Secretary General himself has a 5-point plan for nuclear disarmament.
Yes.
And it's important that people like you are out there pushing this,
Mr. Obama acknowledged that United States had the moral responsibility to work toward the nuclear disarmament because that's the only states which had actually used those bombs. I was delighted to hear that. I think the world was delighted to hear that. And as a result, I think he got the
Nobel Peace Prize. Yes.
I think he deserved that.
And another thing that's important, which we at the United Nations are trying to encourage, is for more countries to join the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
Yes.
And that I believe, just reaffirmed last week, that the United States will continue to do what it can to try and get the Senate to approve the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
Great.
That would be a major step.
It's about time. We have waited for this so long.
Yes, the treaty was negotiated, I believe, in 1996. So here we are in 2011, and it's still not in force.
Well, yes. It's the lack of speed which makes us feel so frustrated. The survivors, we had the dream, we still have the dream that in our lifetime abolition will take place. Well, when we started using that word abolition, people look at me and as though I was a fool. But nowadays, we often use that word, don't we?
Yes, and it's becoming increasingly common term, And there have been a large number of statesmen who used to be what we might call Cold War warriors, who actually are now saying a different thing altogether, and they're pushing for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
Yes, I'm delighted about that.
So there is pressure then,
Yes, we can never give up. We have to keep working, fighting for the victory we want.
And doing so together.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Our guest today has been Miss Setsuko Thurlow, speaking about her life after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. This program has been produced by the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, with technical support by the Department of Public Information. Our audio engineer has been Peter Kurisco. The opinions expressed in this program are solely those of the interviewee and do not necessarily reflect the views of the United Nations. My name is Ewan Buchanan, Political Affairs Officer of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Many thanks for listening.